talking about writing a birth plan and why it's important and how to go about doing it.
Yeah, so a lot of people, we hear a lot that some people are really wanting to write a birth plan, and then we also get people that are afraid to write a birth plan because they hear like, oh, if I write a birth plan, then it gives me something to have go wrong. So we're going to talk about a little bit what exactly is a birth plan, what are the best birth plans that work to help you get the birth that you want, and then to help you go about doing that. So I really think, so a lot of people think of a birth plan as like this very long thing that goes into like your feelings and your emotions and candles and music and all of that stuff. So you can write one of those, especially if you're like delivering out of the hospital. Your midwives might want to know that information so that they really know what you want from your birth, but especially if you're delivering in the hospital. When we say that you are writing a birth plan, it's actually a very short, simple document. And when you go to the hospital, there's a lot of things that might be offered to you or just given to you unless you say no, that aren't medically necessary. They're just routine interventions. That's what we call them.
Right.
And so we like to really, if you hire us as doulas when we have a prenatal, we go over each and every one of these maybe routine interventions or common interventions that may be offered just because they're routine, not because you necessarily need them.
Right. So during those, like she said, during those visits, we'll go over each of them, and some of the things that come up that you may or may not feel like are necessary, we'll go over them. We'll explain what they are. We'll tell you the pros and cons, why they do them, and then you can have the research yourself and make those decisions for yourself. We are not here to tell you what you should or should not do, ever. We strictly want you to be informed, and as long as you're making a decision that you feel comfortable with, that's what we're here for, and then we're going to take that and support you in it.
Yeah, so sometimes people might get overwhelmed if they get to the hospital and they didn't realize that something might happen, or they might get offered something, and so we like you to have that information in advance, so there's no surprises, so that you feel as comfortable as possible when your birth is coming, and you don't feel like you have to make decisions at a point in time when you're really not
In a place to do it.
a mental place to make decisions. So if you have doulas, they can help you go over those things and help you find that information to make those decisions. And if you don't have doulas, look up some of those things. What are some of these routine interventions that happen a lot in the hospital? Find out the pros and cons. And then I recommend, so the way I recommend writing your birth plan, I guess this is my birth plan here. The way I recommend it is that a short introductory paragraph, thanking your birth team, explaining very short what kind of birth you want. So if you're planning a natural birth, saying something along the lines of, we would really like to have a natural intervention-free birth. We realize that plans can always change, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We realize that plans can always change, but as long as all is going well, these are our wishes for birth. And so then you're just going to have like 3 or 4 subjects and bullet points. You want to keep this to 1 page type.
Really simple, because when
really simple.
Your birth team, especially if you're at a hospital, they're going to want to glance at it very quickly and move on. They don't want to read this long diatribe. So bullet points are great because you can make your point quickly and they can see it and move on.
Yeah. So the first section I usually have is for labor. So things that are important to you for labor. This can be how you feel about an IV, how you feel about movement, using a shower, that kind of thing. Pain medications, how you feel about Pitocin. That's something that's very commonly offered in labor. And again, this is for if things are progressing normally. If things are not progressing normally, you can always rethink these things, and then it would be coming at it from a point of, is this medically necessary, not just something you're offering.
Right. So this is not something that's set in stone. You don't write this and say, this is how it's going to go. So we realize that when we write these birth plans that, things come up. And so, you may have said, well, I don't want Pitocin, but, should something happen and you're bleeding a lot, then then we know that we can go back and readdress this with you.
Yeah, or if something happens in labor that makes it safer for your body to need to get the baby out faster, then you could rethink Pitocin at that point. And those are also things that we would go over with you in your prenatals, like what are some of the reasons why this might become medically necessary, and then also other options for those situations.
Exactly.
So then your next bullet point could be for pushing. So this could be things like positions for pushing, talking about episiotomy, which is really something people are not really doing anymore, but people sometimes still put it in there. Talking about time limits for pushing, how you want to push. Do you want to be directed, or do you want to push with your own body? Those kind of things would go in that section. Then you could also, then you could have for the immediate postpartum, that would be your next section. And in there you could have things like, do you want Pitocin? So in the hospital you're given Pitocin. They just give it to you when your baby comes out. It's their routine. Most people don't even realize that. So I like people to be informed, to know about that, what are the pros and cons of that, and for you to be able to make a decision.
Right.
So having, do you want Pitocin to control bleeding, or do you want to wait and see if you need it?
Right.
That kind of thing.
The golden hour, that's a really big one for right after you give birth. You can request, and a lot of our moms do, that they are just kind of left to bond with baby for that first hour. It's a really important time for bonding and for initiating your breastfeeding.
Doing skin to skin.
Skin to skin, exactly. So a lot of times moms will write that in the immediate postpartum section, so that the nurses and their staff know that let's just hold off on any sort of measurements and bathing and all of that, so I can spend time with my baby.
Yeah. And then the next section would be for baby. So there's different interventions that are offered for baby that are really important to look up. Two of those things actually happen in the delivery room. So researching about vitamin K and the erythromycin eye ointment. So there's different choices for that, whether to do them, whether to not do them, the pros and cons of that. But then there's also the choices of, if you do want them, is it possible to delay them so that there's not extra interference on baby while you're in that golden hour. So, and very many hospitals are very okay with waiting that first hour till you've had skin to skin and you've breastfed and you've bonded before doing those interventions, if you feel like you want them in the delivery room. Then also in that section, stuff that doesn't necessarily happen in the delivery room, but happens when you're in the hospital, would be hepatitis B shot and circumcision for baby boys. So it's a very important stuff to look up and to put in that section to let the providers know what your wishes are for that. And then the last section I like to go over is in case of emergency. So if, say, your birth plan does go out the window and you end up really medically needing an emergency C-section, a lot of people think, well, now all these things that I wanted, skin to skin, my baby being with me, like that's all out the window. I'm having C-section and we just do what we do. There's actually a lot of options to keep as much of your birth plan as possible, even with a C-section. Right. So in that, saying, if baby's stable, you want baby to stay in the OR with you, that you still want to delay, if you wanted to delay vitamin K and erythromycin, you want to delay that until after you've gotten to breastfeed. And so those are important things as well. And even delayed cord clamping, which I forgot to put in the for birth section too. That would also be how you feel about cord clamping, delayed, not delayed. So you can even still do that with a cesarean and talk to your providers. It might be a little bit shorter, but anything the baby gets is super helpful. So that's some of the main points. We would help you go about writing that if you choose us to be part of your birth team, but if not, it's still something that you can do to help you feel informed and better before you go to give birth.
And more in control during those moments.
Yeah.
That's what helps make your birth go better, is when you feel like you've made the decisions, whether it goes the way you thought it was going to or not. So.
Yeah. Very, very much so.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining in today, and we'll catch you next week.
Bye.